hello. I am so glad you are here today, and we are going to talk about, I think, a really important topic. I think it's one we don't talk about enough as perhaps women, business owners, and two, it's one that I'm going to share that has crept up on me a couple of times, and I'm going to share with you what my experience with that was. So, we are diving into all things today burnout. And not just burnout in terms, we're going to talk a little bit perhaps about symptoms and things that show up. But I also think it's really important when we're talking about burnout that we talk about our hive because sometimes the awareness, regulation, and connection can actually help us all rise when we are facing a burnout. So I'm going to back up and talk about my own experiences. Before I do that, though, I want to talk a little bit about the burnout whisper. And I want to share a quote with you. And the quote, I'm not sure, it's an unknown quote, but burnout is not a sign that you're doing too much. It is a sign that you're doing too little of what makes you feel alive. Feel that for a minute. Sometimes it can be that we're doing too much, but it can also be a sign that we are not doing enough of the things that really keep that spark inside us alive. Now, for myself, I've really had burnout creep up on me 2 times. And it was not a time when the first one was as my oldest was getting diagnosed with rare disease. And we were going through all the testing. There was a lot of unknown, there was a lot of uncertainty, and it was really, really challenging. And at the same time, and I've painted this picture before, but I feel like it's worth painting again, is so my oldest was 14. We then had a 5 year old and two 2 year olds. So again, teenagers, preschoolers, toddlers, a houseful to say the least. And on top of that, I was working full time in my corporate job, working 40 plus hours a week and trying to do all these things. And I was trying to keep the same pace, which then, as you've been given this very devastating news about this rare disease of a child, and then trying to think like I was going to be able to do all the things I was doing and not actually really like pause and feel some of the feelings that came along with it. And really, as we were entering into a really profound grief cycle that has really now stayed with us from that moment on, it it crept on me quick. I'm not sure why I thought I could just put my head down and keep going. Here was another example. But I did try. I did try for quite some time to just, no, I'm going to get all the information. I'm going to do all the things. And I really, really quickly learned that I couldn't. And for me, how it showed up, it manifested in a few different ways. Um, One was I really did feel that I was sort of racing against a brick wall. And I'm trying to run and the brick wall was coming faster and faster. And it it showed up with, there was far less, joy in our lives feeling at that time. And part of that was we had to deal with sort of what was in front of us and how we were going to navigate that new part. But I was really worried about how everybody else was feeling. And I really wasn't listening to myself and what I needed. And for me, typically, I know I'm getting too far beyond my capacity is for being able to do all the things is usually for me when sleep gets really disrupted. I feel that. I feel that like wholeheartedly. And I actually, at that time, I wasn't into the Pilates industry or the movement field. But I would say also, I could also feel it in my body. Maybe not in the same awareness as I have now. And we'll talk about that in my next burnout. Um, but in that previous one, I could certainly feel it starting to catch up with my body. And I didn't really have the language to express what it was, or how, sort of to start to repair and navigate it. And truthfully, if I'm being really, really honest here, I think what I did is I put a band aid on it that first time. I just was like, nope, I'm really good at pushing through. And I just pushed through. And I pushed through, probably not in a way that actually recognized that it was a burnout. Instead, it was pushing through in a way that was just like, we've got to keep going, one step in front of the other, and don't stop. Until then, your body does force you to stop. And I wouldn't say the first time I actually hit the full stop. I hit the, oh, you're very close. And I would say then, as I got some better coping mechanisms, I was seeing a therapist more regularly to help me navigate grief and dealing with rare disease, that it sort of then I had more skills that actually started to bring some separation between myself and I like to call the Great Wall of Burnout. Um, the second time it happened was several years later, and it was COVID. I'm not going to lie. And this time it manifested very differently. And part of it, I think, was because of the time we were in. It, with so much uncertainty, and there was so much information coming at all of us in different ways. But we were sent home. I had my business shut down. I was told then I could no longer see my child who lived in long-term care. Uh, Everybody was home, and and we were kind of really there was so much uncertainty around what was actually happening, like what was this disease, what this COVID, what was it, what was this virus, and what real risk was there. And it was really hard to navigate what was true and what was not. On top of that, I was also planning the first Pilates conference, Pilates Fest North, of its kind in 2020. And it was supposed to happen in April. And we had sold out 80% of the tickets, and we were still selling tickets into middle of March, which is crazy when you think back at that time. And so that was being shut down. And there was no rule book on how to navigate any of that. Not now how to navigate it as a parent, as a business owner, as an event planner, as a caregiver. There was none of it. And I think that manifested in a very different way. The fatigue was real because we were really kind of living in Groundhog's day in, day out. Like, how do we do this? How do we manage all the emotions coming from every angle? And everyone had a different feeling about it, and maybe even a little different experience with it. And there were days where all I could do was, honestly, it took every ounce of energy to get out of bed to do another Groundhog Day. And that one, I think many of us probably felt. I also think there was, again, not a lot of opportunity to talk about it because we were all very isolated and dealing with all of the other compounding factors that went along with COVID. And for me, that wall was getting, that brick wall was coming at me much faster than I could run away from it. And I had to, I remember having a day where I was like, okay, some days we're feeling like this is just too much. This is too much for one person in one moment. I don't know if I'm not equipped to deal with all of this. It's affected every aspect of our life. And this time I could feel it in my body in a way that I had never felt. And for me, moving forward from that point, I can now recognize in my own movement practice when I'm not necessarily getting really close to burnout, but I'm getting en route. I've got some patterns or some things that have crept in, or there's too much stress that my body isn't tolerating what's going on around me. And it shows up, that manifests very differently in my body. And for me, and I probably didn't have the same kind of movement practice when it happened the first time. The second time, I could feel it very much in my body, and it was very much a nervous system reaction telling me, slow down. We got to stop. And more movement, harder movement, faster movement was not going to be the way out of it. And that was a really humbling experience. And what I will say since COVID, that for me creeps in a little faster now than it ever did before. And I do it's a really good indicator for me where I'm at. Where I'm at, how I'm feeling, how I'm managing stress, how I'm coping. It is a really good indicator. And that's something I feel really blessed about in my movement practice, that I now have other tools and I can recognize and identify, is this a good practice for me today? And the answer, I'll be honest, Pilates isn't always the best practice for me today. Sometimes the better practice for me is getting outside, being in the fresh air, being in nature, and really just breathing and walking. That's sometimes the better choice for me than actually running through a hard level Pilates class. So those are sort of my stories of burnout. And I want to kind of go back and maybe talk a little bit about the signs. Burnout 101. What are the signs maybe you shouldn't ignore? And here's some of the signs for me I knew that I was getting close to a burnout. And one was I was waking up feeling exhausted. Now, I will say, like in this middle season of menopause, there's a different kind of exhaustion that goes with it, but that was a different kind of exhaustion, just waking up, never being able to actually get rested. You also could feel, I didn't feel emotionally numb. That is sometimes a symptom. I felt kind of overly reactive. And that was just how it showed up for me. For some people, you forget things. I was a little more forgetful, but I could still concentrate. A lack of concentration can also be. You can feel disconnected from your purpose or your joy. You can stop doing things that used to bring you energy. You keep pushing through. I'm a pusher througher, which is really actually kind of funny that it's not funny, but interesting. Push through is an exercise in Pilates. I'm the girl who can push through. But I pushed through oftentimes when my body was saying, stop. I needed something different. I needed a different kind of restoration. And it's being able to kind of acknowledge that. And another one is you feel isolated or unsupported. COVID, I think all of us felt isolated, and many felt unsupported. And we didn't know how to ask for help because we didn't even know where the help was available. And I would say, like, perhaps if there's a couple on there that you're like, oh yeah, that's me, that's me. Maybe if there's two or more, it might be time to entertain a pause and a recalibration. Might be time to look at, okay, what's creeping up here, and how do I start to maybe restore a little more? So some ways to help regulate, to reconnect, and these are just a little bit of some of the tools I use myself for my nervous system and care of my nervous system. And these are all fairly simple. These are not like you've got to run a marathon, because that would not be good. And these are really scientifically backed. These are techniques that are highly recommended. One, breath work. I cannot say enough about breath work. For me, it has been, we've had Carrie Miller on a couple times, and she is a wonderful, wonderful breathwork teacher. I cannot believe the release we get when we actually can breathe. Now, I will say on breath work, though, what didn't work for me when I was in a state of really close to that burnout is I really struggled with a box breathing. That was not a good one for me. So, like, in for 4, hold for 7, out for 8, that I could do, but where I really struggled where was if it was a full box, right? Where we were inhaling, hold, exhaling, hold, inhaling, hold, exhaling, hold. The second hold was actually kind of created a panic in my body. So I think it's also an invitation to find what works for you. Breath work on a really deep level, really moving some of that stress out of our system was a game changer for me. And it is a practice to this day that I can reconnect to myself. 2, grounding through physical movement. Pilates is a great option, but it doesn't need to be a hard, it can be a flow fundamental class. Walks in nature. For me, getting outside is, I always feel better. I always feel better when I can be in nature, when I can smell the trees and just be outside. And for me, just the walking pattern is a little bit meditative. It feels good. My body doesn't have to think so much to find that rhythm. So it's it's finding what it is for you. If it's yoga, if it's tai chi, if it's dance, whatever it is, that is sort of a grounding practice through physical movement. And I think being kind of mindful about it is helpful. I think for me, the other was like really building in pauses in my day, particularly in between transitions. So if I was going right from teaching to like mom duty, I needed a minute. I just needed a minute to say, I'm going to leave the teacher hat here. I'm going to breathe. And then I'm going to put the mom hat and then continue. And that for me was really important to just have that little strategy of just a mini pause. Everyone can have 2 minutes to just make that transition without doing it mindfully rather than not mindfully. The other one is, I think, like, hydration is key. Hydration is key for all of us at every point. We feel better when we're truly hydrated. Drink more water. And then, it's also like really being mindful about sleep hygiene. What is a regular bedtime? What is a time that, what's the routine to going to bed? At what time am I getting up? And really being really devoted to sleep hygiene, because you can't, the more we disrupt that, then we're kind of really playing with that circadian rhythm and we're getting out of it. And we need a different kind of rest when we're going towards burnout. And we want to be able to have restorative sleep. That's where we repair and where we heal. So really being mindful of really great sleep hygiene. So there's just a few tips that I had, and I think it's you can't pour from an empty nervous system. We cannot. And we need to be mindful of that and take care of ourselves, and listen to ourselves. Our bodies are going to tell us this way earlier than we're probably going to listen. And if we listen and we take some really mindful action to regulate and reconnect to ourselves, then we can help hopefully avoid a burnout. I want to speak and shift a little bit now to the hive and how the hive heals. And I love the hive. I love our hive here. And again, it goes back to you were not meant to do it alone. We were not. When we are thinking we can get through this burnout ourselves, you can't. I'm sorry, you can't. Burnout is magnified when you're in isolation. We, if we were just to lock ourselves away, sit behind our desks, behind our computer, we then magnify that burnout. And the stories we start to tell ourselves about burnout get bigger than perhaps maybe they are. And they might not even be fully true. I think, in nature, and I love this is why we've called this the archive. In nature, bees don't survive outside the hive. We don't either. We weren't meant to be by ourselves navigating these things. And if you really look at how, the bees come back to the hive, they work together towards that greater good, you need to find the bees in your hive surrounding you and who can support you when you're walking through something really, really hard. And I don't want you ever to underestimate the power of having that hive around you. The ARC Hive community is really this hive community, and each guest on here that I have is curated to inspire you and really keep you going, to help you find true regenerative success. That you hear these stories, and I hope you hear a piece of yourself in those stories and be like, oh, me too. And realize like life is so much more fulfilled when we are doing it with people around us. It doesn't matter what it is. We thrive in a hive. And burnout will never actually thrive in a hive. Burnout actually will start to just fall away, because when we again come together, that feeling of togetherness starts to lessen the feeling of burnout. Burnout itself, if we allow it to steal our joy, will take us out of that and will separate us from ourselves and from what we love. And I think that's really important to understand, that even though that might be the feeling you have, and I honor that and I see you in that, because when you're not feeling your best and you're feeling overwhelmed, it's so easy to just pull away. But I ask you, if you're feeling that at all, what if you leaned into the hive? And if you feel like you don't have a hive, this is your hive. We are your hive. Reach out to us. Let us be part of that for you. And don't do it alone. I also want you to invite you maybe to think about ways for you to engage. And one would be, if it's a burnout that you're feeling in business, and I'll tell you, entrepreneurs are some of the most likely to experience burnout, is call your business bestie. Pick the phone up and say, I'm feeling a little spent. I have that conversation a lot of times with my business bestie, being like, yep, this week it got me. But again, being able to just express it and share it with someone actually takes the temperature of that feeling down. I think also, don't underestimate the power of social media. And it doesn't have to be public social media. You could DM someone in your industry. Just send them a note being like, hey, I just wanted to reach out. I was kind of having a hard day and I saw you did this and it really inspired me. Or have you ever felt that? And maybe you can make a connection that way. But you're also taking down that temperature by not staying in that, I'm going to do it myself. And then don't be afraid to join a group, a podcast community. You've got one here, a coaching circle if you need to start creating a bigger community so that you feel supported. Whatever that is, it could be feeling supported as a mom, as a wife, as a woman, as a business owner, as whatever it is, caregiver, whatever it is that you need. I challenge you to do that. And I know this isn't easy, and it's even harder when you're getting closer to that feeling of burnout. So I actually challenge you, if you're not feeling burnout now, awesome. Start to make sure you've got that community and that hive around you. And again, this hive is always here for you. I want to now reframe a little bit, reframing burnout, because I want you really to know that you're not broken. Burnout doesn't mean you're flawed. It's a nervous system survival response. We're kind of a little wired that way, but we were more wired that way like when man first began rather than what we're in now. It doesn't mean you're failing. It doesn't. It just might mean you're human. And it might mean it's a signal that you need to make a change. I also think, and please hear me on this one, it might be the permission slip you need to rest. Rest is so healing. You might need to rest. You might need to realign. And you might need to return to the things you're doing with a different kind of clarity. And I think, rest is not a retreat. It's a resistance in our culture that glorifies a hustle. I rest first. I'm not interested in a hustle. I want that restorative rest so that I can show up and do the things I love the way I want to. And I can't do that from a place of burnout. I can do that from a place of healing and restorative, real restorative rest. So I think it's important to acknowledge burnout if it's starting to happen. And I think it's also important to reframe it. What can you change? There are some factors in both of my burnouts towards burnout I couldn't change. I couldn't change COVID. I couldn't change a rare disease. But what I could change was how I was going to show up, how I was going to respond, and who was going to walk alongside me to help. So I hope you maybe could take a moment and find what are those things for you that you can change, and maybe what do you need to realign. And I encourage you to choose one maybe nervous system practice for you to try today, whether it's breath work, whether it's movement, whether it's the pause. I also challenge you to reach out to one person in your hive. Do that. And then perhaps today for your journal prompt, let's do a little reflection. What does success look like without burnout? Let's ask ourselves that question, because thinking we're going to do all the things all the time at 100% capacity is not realistic. So what does success look like for you without burning yourself out? Take some time to reflect on that today and see what comes up for you. And if you feel comfortable sharing, please send me a DM. You can email me, you can reach out, and I'd love to hear, because I think there's a reframe. We do not need to keep working towards the burnout. I would love to see us flip that script and work towards our most healed, our most restorative, our most restful self, and how we show up like that. What could the world look like? I think it could be pretty incredible. So thank you. Thank you for listening to this podcast, this topic on burnout. I hope that for anyone who needed to hear this today, you've got something to take away. And I can't wait to see you back here very soon.